Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickette. We're bringing you one of two episodes about the Stoughton High Building Project, giving you an update on where things are as we enter the later winter months and early spring months of 2016. One episode dealt with the educational aspect of the building and what you can expect in the classroom once a new Stoughton High School has been constructed. This episode will go into more of the process of how the building is being designed, what you can expect from a building standpoint, what you can expect from a tax and cost standpoint, which I know is important for the residents in town, and also what type of schedule and timeline you can expect as this project continues to move forward. So let's get right into things, and I'll introduce the panel I have today on this episode. So I have TJ Recupero, who is a selectman and is also the chairman of the Stoughton High Building Committee. I have Franceschi from DRA Architects, and I have Tim Bonfatti on the far end of the screen, who is from Compass Project Management, who is the owner's project manager of this project. So thank you for joining me, and let's get right into it. So right now, the project, as we stand late February, taping this show, the project has entered went from being in the feasibility study phase to now in the schematic design phase. So in the feasibility study phase, which took place at the beginning part of the school year, up until recently, you were looking at various options of where you can put the building. You were exploring options as to what the building would be, whether it would be a renovation or a renovation addition or a new construction, and ultimately went with the new construction. And as for the site, went with the current location where the football field is located right now. So that was approved by the high school building committee. A conceptual design of the building was approved. That's called option C2A, and we will be showing you that in more detail later on in this half hour. And this brings us to the schematic design phase, and this is the phase that's right before the town meeting would have to approve the project, and the voters would be going to the ballots in June to approve or not a debt exclusion, which is different than an override, the debt exclusion to fund the project. So let's get started, just how you got to this point, just kind of a brief overview of what went on in the feasibility study portion. So
maybe if we go to the slide, I can,
sure.
TJ could talk to a little bit about the committee's makeup and...
Sure. This has been a year-long process. We actually started right around this time last year our first step was appointing Compass Project Management to serve as the owner's project manager in this. We moved then into appointing, and actually the architect isn't chosen by the committee, it's chosen by a design and selection committee that MSBA, we do have delegates on it, but that group of, I think, 19 people chose DRA as our architect, and very happy with their choice. Then we went into a process of over the feasibility, but we had to one by one tick off all the elements of the project, the site, whether we're going to build new or renovate in place, and finally, if I'm answering the question as asked, we got to a point where we had eliminated all the other options. We actually determined the feasibility of this project would best be served if it was a new building on this location, in this size, and it fit the educational program that our school administration had drafted for us.
And I believe you have a graphic of that, Tim, where it shows all of the different locations that you looked at in deciding, if we can come off screen back to the studio real quickly, it just all of the different places that you looked in town before settling on what many thought, you had to do your due diligence, but many thought this was going to be the outcome right from the get-go, right where the building was. So I think we have that slide ready just to kind of show where you were looking, all different parcels of land, some publicly owned, some privately owned, and you see all those red marks right there for drawbacks. You look at the one to the far left with all the green check marks, that's the current site. So what about the current site provided an advantageous solution or location for this new building?
Well, it first of all was located in the more ideal location within Stoughton, closer to the center. Many of these other parcels that were considered were outlying and not centrally located. The existing Pearl Street site is large enough to accommodate the building of this size to house a high school for 1,000 students. It has utility access, has roadway access, and in the end, obviously, it's owned by the town already, so there was an acquisition cost there. So, and it's buildable land. There aren't wetlands on the site and so forth. So those were all positive things for the current Pearl Street location, which were many of those were negatives for all the 10 other sites being considered.
Back to the studio, Tim, you were looking at a previous diagram which kind of went into the flow of the decision-making process and kind of going into that a little bit and how that plays a factor at all the different components you kind of have to look at.
Yeah, when districts go into this process of working with the school building authority to build new schools, what we recommend, and I think it proves to be the most efficient way to do it, is a very process-driven decision-making, so that the community realizes that this wasn't done seat of the pants or by opinion or a group of people getting together. We take a very methodical look at it. So it starts with, and as the other show went into great detail, it starts with understanding the education plan that drives the design and drives ultimately the layout of the building and the size of the building. Then you basically, after that education plan is sort of understood and what the size of the building would be, is you begin to explore in more detail options. And you just had shown the graphic that we cast a broad net in Stoughton in terms of looking at really 11 different sites and a total of 8 options at the high school. We also then, against those options or consistent with those options, we set up a criteria to measure them. And we did that both for those sites that you showed, but also for when we ended up with a short list around the project, the options we finally selected. We measure that constantly back against a list of criteria, and the committee makes measured judgments about what is the best solution. And in the end, you end up with, after you've done a lot of due diligence like that, we find you end up with the best and the most preferred option. And this is all done in concert with the MSBA. They are with us every step of the way, and they were very with us on this project and very pleased with our decision on that.
And of course, you had to be approved just to get into the schematic design phase by the MSBA. They pretty much have benchmarks throughout the course of this project as well that you need to meet their approval. And so so you got the location down. One of the other major decisions that needed to be made, as I mentioned at the start of the show, was deciding whether or not to build new or to renovate. And what I found interesting was that when you went through all of these options was that the cost for renovation ended up being in the same ballpark as building new. And so how did that kind of end up being the case? You would think that maybe a renovation would be a few dollars cheaper. You might not get as new and shiny a building, but how did that kind of end up happening?
On the screen are a couple of the options we looked at. I think there were 4 different versions of addition renovations. The challenge, Jeff, was in trying to get the existing building to accommodate the education plan. So it wasn't simply just renovating the existing building. It was really altering it, reconfiguring it to make it work. It wasn't easy because the existing building is kind of a traditional layout, linear, double-loaded quarters, long quarters with rooms on either side. It didn't have the distribution of teachers' rooms and small group rooms and special ed spaces that the education plan called for. And so in each of the options of addition renovation, there was a significant amount of demolition of the existing building and building new, and then even within the parts of the existing high school that were saved, there was a lot of reconfiguring, taking down walls, changing the sizes of spaces which were too small to meet today's standards. So after all that is said and done, and we had 2 independent cost estimators look at it, that's where we arrived at as you said, the result that the cost to renovate the existing building and add on to it was close to, and in some cases more than, the cost of new construction. And the value of what you got in the end was significantly greater for new construction.
Can I just add to that too? It's important that he says, when Carl speaks, he's talking about addition renovation, because there was no scenario where we could do just renovation. Mm-hmm. There were certain parts of the building that were either too old or too substandard to just renovate. Mm. So certain portions, building A, for example, is the best example. There's no way, and the gymnasium. There's no way that we could just renovate what we have right now, mm-hmm. and meet the standards for a high school in 2016.
Right.
And so, looking at that, you end up picking a new construction option C2A, and we can pull up graphs of that. Or
well, what I'd like to do is just show it quickly, if we could.
Sure.
Just to follow up on that add reno option. So these are the 4 options that we ended up with. The B options, B2 and B3 are the add reno options. C1A and C2A were the 2 new construction options. And one of the things that intuitively people think that add reno is cheaper because they think you're preserving so much of the building. But in the MSBA program, much of what we really want to look at is what does the town pay for, not necessarily even what the whole project cost is, but what is the town share going to be. And in add reno options where you need to keep the students in the school, you end up building swing space or multiple phases, so it extends the construction period in such a way that
modulars
and things that, and it ends up being modulars which are not reimbursable by the MSBA. That's basically a sunk cost. It ends up being a situation where between the length of construction extending out and these modulars, that the cost become what we found, and that they were, except for B3, which was quite a bit more money to the town. The other 3 options, B2, C1, and C2A,
they were all in the same ballpark.
We're all in the same ballpark. And this graphic sort of showed how brightly yet green that C2A option graded out when the committee went and looked at each one of them. And it was pretty, as you can see, pretty obviously why that decision was made at that point.
Sure. Well, let's come back to the studio briefly, allow Tim to bring up the renderings of the conceptual designs of the outside, just to kind of give viewers at home the chance to see what the layout of this project will look like. So this is something that you guys have gone over in multiple high school building committee meetings, and these are meetings that you can follow along and watch on our government channel at Stoughton Media Access. So right now we're looking again at option C2A, and if you're looking at this picture right now on screen, to the right of your screen, just to give you an idea of where we are, going up and down on the screen to the right would be Pearl Street. Going on the bottom of your screen, going in the right to left direction, would be Adams Street. So you have the new school, which is the big white rectangular shape towards the bottom. Above that, you have a grass field, which would be like a soccer field inside a track. And then to the right of that, you have a synthetic turf football field with bleachers, and it's not just a football field. That would be, it's a mischaracterization. It's really a multi-purpose field where, it could be soccer, field hockey, lacrosse. I'm assuming lights in the field. So,
lights.
Possibly the addition of night games for some other Stoughton High sports, which is not a a possibility at this point. Only football plays night games at home. And then you also have that small white rectangular space in one of the parking lots is the superintendent's wing, which if you're interested in hearing more about the separation of the superintendent's wing from the school itself, I encourage you to watch the other program we filmed updating you on like the educational aspects of this building. We get into that in more detail. While this is up, one issue that I've heard residents talk about, the committee itself has talked about, is parking. And just kind of how many parking spaces are there now and how the parking will accommodate day-to-day use and also event usage.
Well, I can speak to that. The education plan actually included goals for the number of parking spaces, both on a daily basis and then talking about event parking too. And one of the positive things about this option is the building is a little bit closer to the middle school, and we can both accommodate the day-to-day requirements for the high school in the parking areas, the gray areas that surround the proposed high school. But then we also can share the parking that's off Cushing Street by the middle school for event parking. Much easier now that the building's more accessible to Cushing Street and the middle school parking lot for evening and weekend events when that school isn't occupied.
No more trip up steep access hill.
Right,
right.
Exactly. So it's a nice compact site plan in that respect, and the parking is very accessible to the building. And then the other improvement on the outdoors related to that is that we now have dedicated and separate car drop-off areas, bus drop-off areas, and even special ed drop-off areas.
So where would that, how would that kind of flow-wise, like you're looking at that, where's the front door to this building?
So the front door faces Pearl Street. It's accessed on the football field side of this diagram. And the driveway entrance off Pearl is actually the same driveway entrance that exists today. It just continues on and becomes a longer drive down to the new school. And that's where parents would be able to queue up and drop off children or pick them up in the afternoons. The buses would be on the left side of the building. And again, they have a dedicated lane, and it works well with sharing the buses with the middle school as well, because as it works today, students get on for both the middle school and high school on the same buses, and they can park in one location and either pick up or drop off those students from that dedicated bus lane on the left side. And then on the parking lot on the Adams Street side of the building, there's opportunity there for special ed vans to have a dedicated drop-off and direct access into the building.
Now the grade of the land right now, there's a dip when you go from, let's say you're at like the A building spot of the building and you're going to go to the superintendent's wing. There's actually a pretty good dip. Obviously with the football field there, you must be leveling off.
Yeah, all the proposed new development work is all at the same level, down at the level of the current Adams Street parking lot, football field level. So that new driveway coming in from Pearl Street will have a gradual slope on it down to the new school. And the football field actually works well into sort of a natural bowl that will be created on at least two sides. On the Pearl Street side, the ground is sloping there, and that's where the bleachers will be in the football field at the bottom of that. So it works out well with the site grading.
Now, coming back into the studio, well, we do have a couple of other renderings we can bring up in a bit. Just a couple questions in terms of the building that we don't have. There's not conceptual drawings of yet, but the gymnasium, I know that right now Stoughton High really can't host large tournament games. A few years ago they had to host a tournament game in Canton because the gym was just too small. How large, seating wise would this new gym be for, from a spectator standpoint?
We can get just in the bleachers alone about 1,000 spectators, which is also close to the enrollment of the school, so that can also work in that fashion for an all-school assembly. And the space itself is large enough. It's almost double the size of the existing. The existing gym's around 7,000 square feet, as I recall. This gym will be 12,000 square feet. So it'll have 2 full-size basketball courts and a dividing curtain, in addition to, better safety zone around the court and larger bleacher capacity.
And one other issue that's come up is the auditorium. And right now, the auditorium, can you just kind of explain where it is right now and if there is a chance if it could be bigger?
Yeah, that's been an area that's had some sort of challenges to it as we work through this design phase, because in the education plan, the goal for Stoughton was to try and have an auditorium that accommodates the entire student population. 1,065 students is the projected or the design enrollment. The current high school auditorium is somewhere around 920 students, as I recall. But unfortunately, the state, being a partner in all this process, also has some guidelines that have to be respected. And one of them is that the maximum size of an auditorium that they will fund and reimburse is 750 seats. And we've had some discussions with them, and we understand that they are, and their board of directors may now be considering an option that would allow towns to exceed that number if they're willing to pay for the difference themselves. If they're in a situation like we are here of replacing an existing building, which has a larger auditorium. So there is a possibility that the size of the auditorium could increase, but right now we're dealing with roughly 750 seats in the current schematic design, but we're working on an option that takes it up to the current size of 920.
And with that, how much would that add to, right now is the plan that we're looking at, that conceptual design that we had on screen a couple minutes ago, is that for 750 seats? How much does that have to change if you add a couple hundred seats?
Well, we're actually trying to be clever about it and not change the footprint of the building and keep the size the same by adding seats, by adding a balcony. So the volume of the building would increase, but the area of the footprint would not increase, so that we could get a balcony with the difference, which is about 180 seats, I think, in a balcony configuration.
Sure. And as a half hour goes quickly, we're already approaching the conclusion of the half hour. So before we get to that, maybe we could just bring up those renderings again on screen, just to show you a couple of other views. This is actually great because this can tie into timeline.
Yes.
So. Before we get into the $1 million question, or more accurately, the $70 million question of the cost. So,
well, this is basically, this graphic shows the phase 1 of the project. So the building will be built at the same time, obviously, as the current school is occupied. So in the foreground, this is a bird's eye view from Pearl Street heading toward Town Hall. The foreground is the existing school, and while the school is in session, we'll be building the new school, which is in the background. That's phase 1. That's now scheduled for between June of 2017 and occupancy in the fall of 2019. So it's a 2-year building project. And then phase 2 would be the completion of the fields that replace basically where the current school is, the football field and site transportation, circulation, etc., and the backfield. That would occur in phase 2 from September of 2019 through June of 2020. That would obviously also include the demolition of the existing school.
Sure. So just to give everybody an idea, because we kind of flipped the perspective of this map, where are we looking at?
This is looking at it from Pearl Street. So if you're at an elevated view on Pearl Street looking down, and on your left there is Adams Street, and the middle school is up in the background on the right. And
so with building new, you don't displace any students during the school day. The old high school, if we bring back the previous slide, the old high school is in use the entire time until that second phase.
Yes. We even are able to save most of the parking, although it's shown here as being, but most of the parking near the auditorium would be preserved.
So you're looking at the 27, 2017-2018 and the 2018-2019 school years as the construction years.
Yes.
The building opens in the 2019 to 2020 school year, and the fields are being built in that school year. So by the 2020-2021 school year, everything.
Yeah, the
could be
fields,
in
the
place.
fields
Right.
need to be in place, and they need to go through some growing seasons, so they're not
Right.
automatically, usable for probably another year, some of them. But
Right.
of course,
Except for the turf.
the turf
Turf.
field would be used right away.
So what happens, and obviously we don't have a ton of time to get into it, but coming back to the studio, what happens to the athletics, the football team, the soccer, it usually plays on the other end of the West athletic fields, but still, just the athletic teams, they're going to be displaced. Where do they go?
Well, we did meet with the director of athletics, so he's planning it. We don't know where right now, but
He's making arrangements.
he's making arrangements. They will have to move somewhere else.
So this would definitely, for over the course of 3 to 4 years, would be some play. There will be all road games, so to speak,
Yes.
for
For 2 years.
For 2 years, but
2 years plus perhaps for some a little bit longer, but mostly 2 years. Football would be 2 years.
Yeah, well, keep in mind also, what we have a campus that includes the West School, junior high, and we're looking at just the high school component of it, but there's a large area of fields that are between the high school and the West School, and some of
That
that
could be
will
used.
certainly be utilized. But
Sure.
I don't want to do his planning for him, but I know discussing that with the director of athletics, that's one of the things that he mentioned.
Discussing. Sure. So with our time left, let's bring up the cost analysis. As again, that's an extremely important aspect of this project. So looking at this graph up here, if you could just kind of go over the costs for those who, like me, who forgot to bring their glasses.
This is, I'm trying to expand it, but this is the tax, this is currently the tax impact on the project on the current thinking of a borrowing that would be in the order of $70 million. So the town share is roughly in the order of $70 million. And at this point, it's important to point out we haven't designed enough to get the kind of cost impact that this may change a few dollars here or there by the time people vote. And TJ, maybe you can talk to it since you're more familiar with this than I am.
Sure. This is based on, I can't see it any better than you can because of the lights, but I worked, town manager put some of this together. Based on the average assessment in town of $300,000, you can expect, this uses 2016 tax rates, you can expect to pay, I think it's $372 per year additional on your taxes.
Yes.
And you can see it also breaks it down for a home that cost $400,000 or is assessed, at $400,000, and again,
496.
Right.
40, is that what it says?
So yeah, Tim, do you mind just giving, or Carl, giving us those figures?
Yeah,
for,
so the tax rate is $1.24 per 1,000. So whatever your assessment is, $1.24 per 1,000 is the tax impact. For a $200,000 home, that's $248 a year. For a $300,000, it's $372 per year. For a $400,000, it's $496. This is the maximum tax impact. It probably will decline over time. The Stoughton average home assessment in 2016 is $307,000, and that tax impact would be $381 for the average home.
And so this is certainly something that we just kind of gave you a brief overview. We'll get into more details closer to the actual vote being taken in June and its impact. So that's just kind of a taste of what you can expect, and that's over a 20-year borrowing period. And again, it's a debt exclusion, not an override. So the raising the taxes, it's not a broad raising the taxes, just for this project.
Just for the high school. An override is, a general budget override will be forever. We override that to meet our budgetary expenses, and that's forever. This is just for the high school, and although it's 20 years when the high school is paid off,
it
the debt
goes back,
exclusion
right.
goes.
Right, so it's specifically for this project. So again, I want to thank TJ, Carl, and Tim for joining me on this program. And if you're interested in the educational aspect of this project, I encourage you to watch the other program that we filmed giving you an update on the Stoughton High Building Project. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Jeffrey Pickette, and I'll see you next time on Stoughton Spotlight.